If you're a longtime Geek's Guide to the Galaxy listener, please rate and review us on iTunes or using the podcast app on your phone. And I want to give a special thank you to Triffid Eater, who just gave us this 5-star review. Great podcast, great execution, coupled with a wide variety of guests and topics, make this a wonderful podcast. Not every topic hits home for me, but that's to be expected. Thank you all for a great contribution. So big thanks again to Triffid Eater for that great review. Alright, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 545 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories. Publishers Weekly writes, visceral settings and robust characters will have readers marveling at how much Kirtley is able to fit into a limited page count. For SFF fans with no time to sink into a doorstopper, these concentrated doses of genre goodness will hit the spot. So again, the book is called Save Me Please and Other Stories, and it's available now on Amazon.com. And today on the show, we'll be discussing Season 1 of the Apple TV Plus series Silo, based on the novels by Hugh Howey. And this will include spoilers for everything in the show, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got our producer, John Joseph Adams. He's the editor of Lightspeed Magazine, and the series editor of the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, and he's also edited more than 40 other anthologies. His most recent projects are the Amazon Original Stories collection The Far Reaches, featuring stories by James S. A. Corey, Veronica Roth, John Scalzi, Nnedi Okorafor, Rebecca Roanhorse, and Anne Leckie, and Out There Screaming, an anthology of new black horror, which he edited with Jordan Peele. So, John, welcome back.
Always good to be here.
The next up, we've got Sara Lynn Michener, making her 26th appearance on the show. She's the author of many essays, mostly on the intersection between fandom, science fiction, feminism, and social justice, with titles such as Science Fiction Often Wins the Bechdel Test by Breaking It, which is part of its job. She's also the chief creative officer at Lightburn Software, so she has access to an army of laser cutters, and she's currently planning the company's first convention. So Sara, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
And also joining us today is Rafael Jordan, making his 16th appearance on the show. He's written over 25 feature films, including Lost Colony, The Legend of Roanoke, The Immortal Voyage of Captain Drake, and Star Runners. He also co-created and co-wrote Salvage Marines, a space opera series starring Casper Van Dien and Peter Shinkota, and he's also the lead guitarist of Viscera, an LA-based rock band who provided music for the series. So, Rafael, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Level 16. Sweet.
Okay, so let's start off with Sara, and have you tell us about your expectations going into Silo.
I was pretty much on board when I saw the preview. And unlike a lot of my friends, apparently, I had not heard of this. It's one of those things where, like, when I, posted about how good this series was, everyone was like, oh yeah, I read the book 10 years ago. And I'm like, who are all these? And then I realized, like, oh, I had a lot going on 10 years ago. And that's why I missed it. But it was just one of those funny things where, I had just never personally heard of it. And I was very excited because I love what Apple TV Plus is doing, especially when so many of the other streamers are making really penny-wise, pound-foolish decisions right now. Apple is just, they get it. Like they're focusing on science fiction, first of all, which makes me very happy. But they're also, the production quality is just incredible. The level of detail in all of their shows is just incredible. But they're also willing to, they're not operating the same way that other streamers seem to be operating right now, where something has to do amazingly well in the first 2 weeks or else it never gets a second season, and then it disappears entirely from the streaming platform and you can't even watch it. And, so it's, I absolutely love it, but I didn't know anything going in.
Yeah, I mean, on this podcast, we've reviewed Foundation and Severance. Are there other Apple TV Plus science fiction shows that people should check out?
I enjoyed C. Like, I think C is very much there's certain things about it that were very sort of formulaic but I absolutely loved certain aspects of it. But there are, they've been doing a couple of other things too, and they have a couple of things in development that I'm really excited about.
I mean, For All Mankind is incredible. I mean,
yes,
and
yes.
any science fiction fan definitely should watch it, because it's like starts off alternate history, but then it gets into, so it stays alternate history obviously, but it gets into so many like hardcore science fiction stuff or topics that it's really dope, and it's just amazing acting and production and writing and everything.
Yeah, Apple TV has been absolutely killing it between C, Severance, Foundation, For All Mankind, and now this. And I'm an Android PC guy, but credit where it's due.
I guess I'll just explain for listeners if you don't know. So the backstory with this book is that Hugh Howey was just, sort of a kind of unknown self-published author. He was a bookstore employee / hired yacht captain, and just sort of self-publishing stuff, not really expecting to make any money, or, just for just wanting to get his work out there for whatever small audience would find it. And he published a short story set in the Wool, sort of the Silo / Wool universe. And just thinking of it as a standalone short story, which is basically the first episode of the show, I guess, more or less.
Yeah.
And people were just like, "Oh, this is great. I want more." And so he eventually wrote 5 stories and packaged them together as a book. And it just became this viral mega sensation on, the Kindle, the Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing store. And he was reportedly making $100,000 a month just having self-published this Wool book. See, John, is there anything else to say about that Hugh Howey backstory thing?
I don't think so. I mean, it means just that it's like he wasn't like just some overnight success where he just decided to do this thing on a whim. It's like, yeah, I mean, he's somebody that did want to be a writer like for a really long time, and it's just that this is the unusual route that he got to be there. I mean, it's, the book is great. All of the Wool books are great, but then he's got just a wealth of other wonderful material as well. So I mean, he's definitely an author that you can really dive into and find a lot of reading for many months or years perhaps.
And I guess full disclosure, John and Hugh Howey have done a bunch of projects together.
Yeah, I mean, I edited a couple of anthologies with him, and then when I had my novel in print, we did secure the rights to his some of his self-published books, including Wool and Shift and Dust, the sequels. We did his first short story collection called Machine Learning, which had never been published before, but the stories had. So, but yeah.
Yeah, and so John and I interviewed Hugh back in 2013. And so at the time, I read through as much of Wool as I had time to before the interview. And I read about half of it, which very conveniently was basically exactly what this show covers. So I've read exactly what this show covers and no more. So I don't know anything beyond that. But so how about Rafael? What were your expectations going into Silo?
Well, in truth, I wasn't familiar with these books, but when I saw just the initial marketing, I was very excited for it because I just love bunkers, man. Any kind of sci-fi or horror story set in a bunker, I am in. I know I'm really weird when it comes to this stuff. Like, I would Airbnb the Silo if I could. I'm like, why would you even want to leave? But yeah, Sarah knows some of my thoughts on this because I post a lot to social media. I was initially struck by just some superficial similarities between City of Ember, which I like a lot. But, it's kind of a young adult film, and I always wished it had been adapted into a series. So when I kind of caught wind of Silo, I was very excited because it seemed like the adult, more, in-depth version. And I can't wait for season 2 and 3. I'm tempted to read, but I kind of don't want to spoil myself.
So I'm not familiar with City of Ember, but it's also set in kind of a big bomb shelter and the world outside is toxic or stuff like that, or?
Yeah, basically, in that film, Lena Mayfleet and her friend realize that they've been living underground. They've been living underground for a few hundred years, but there's an expiration date. And that's where the stories definitely diverge, because in that story, they're actively trying to find a way out, but people have kind of, like if they don't leave, everything is going to fall apart. And I guess, similarly, like there's probably a shelf life for the silo too, but no one's in any real rush to leave, seemingly. But yeah, oddly enough, Tim Robbins is in both projects. So, kind of led some people to think, well, wait a minute, are they related? But they're not.
Okay, so whenever they make a Fallout movie, they got to get Tim Robbins.
Right.
It was funny because I was watching Silo this week, and I was like, wow, this reminds me actually a lot of a book I read as a kid called This Time of Darkness. And I was like, I wonder if anyone's ever asked Hugh Howey if he read that as a kid. And so I Googled This Time of Darkness, Hugh Howey, and I found an interview where somebody asked him, and he says, no, I never read that. But it's a story where, there's these people living in what they believe is a skyscraper in the future that's completely closed in because they believe the world outside is completely irradiated and toxic and everything. And then at the end of the book, they find their way to the surface, and it turns out they've been living underground the whole time without knowing it, and that the world outside is fine. But so I read that interview, and then I didn't even think much anything else of it. And then I went back and listened to our interview with Hugh Howey from 10 years ago and realized actually I was the person who asked him about that book. And I just sort of glanced at this interview online without even realizing it was my interview.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, so I mean, these ideas of, like the bunkers and the toxic world and is it real and stuff, these are all, pretty familiar concepts in science fiction.
Oh, yeah. And just to be clear, as a screenwriter myself, to me, it's always about the execution. I mean, there's only so many, like, I'll watch a million, like, haunted ship movies, At the end of the day, a haunted ship is a haunted ship. But it's like, I'll watch that story 100 times with different characters and different creatives,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the story of everything in science fiction, is that it's all about the execution, because it's like at this point in history, almost every idea has been done in some form or another. It's really hard to come up with any kind of original ideas. I mean, I guess in any genre really at this point, but I guess in science fiction, it feels really stale if you don't. Whereas like in other media, like, or other genres, you could potentially get away with it as long as the execution is good. But like in science fiction, it's like you have to have good execution, and you have to put some kind of distinct twist on it that makes it all your own, So.
Absolutely. And this show is so well executed and produced, and it has so many awesome twists along the way. I'm sure we'll get into those.
Yeah, I guess I sort of explained by implication what this show is about, but just to flesh that out a little bit more. So there's 10,000 people living in this gigantic missile silo type thing underground. And humanity has been in this thing for hundreds of years, and they know nothing really of the outside world. All their records were destroyed. And at some point in the past, there was this rebellion that tried to, at least this is what they believe, tried to open up the door to the silo, which would have killed everyone by letting all the toxic fumes and everything in. And ever since then, there's been this very strict regime controlling everything that happens, and to even suggest that you want to go outside is basically a death sentence, and all the to try to pry into the past is also kind of forbidden, and is also basically a death sentence. And so the and even their lack of knowledge of the outside world is so complete that we find out that they don't even know what stars are. They can see there's this monitor showing the surface, and they can see these lights in the sky, and they're sort of speculating about what they might be. So they really have absolutely no idea about anything outside the silo. And so the inciting incident is that there's a woman, and she comes across a forbidden hard drive and finds a little video file which seems to show that the surface is actually green and trees and birds flying around and blue skies and stuff. And this makes her believe that the monitor is a lie and that they're being kept underground with lies for some sinister purpose. And so Sarah, having no foreknowledge of this story at all, kind of what were your initial impressions of the show?
I loved it. Like, it's, it has everything. It's like the sort of classic cave allegory story. And, I think stories where people are sort of in a microcosm of some sort, and they're trying to find out whether or not that's real or not, will always really appeal to me because I was raised religious. And, you know, anytime you're sort of raised in an environment where you're very like sheltered from other versions of reality, I think it's a really interesting question. And I think a lot of us have been raised that way in one way or another. And so I think that's one of the universal appeals of stories like this. There are very few of us. I have met actually a few people who have been raised with so much freedom, and they are fascinating people. You know, they traveled a lot as babies. One of my friends knew how to swim before he knew how to walk because he was raised on an island. And, you know, you learn, I think, through meeting people like that, how few people like that, how the rest of us really are socialized and programmed by society. You know, even despite many groups' efforts otherwise, we are all very much programmed to believe in a specific world that we live in. And it takes a lot of imagination and actively deciding to think outside of that to sort of break free from some of those internal chains. And I was immediately hooked. Like we watched the first episode not knowing anything, you know, going in, and I just turned to Jason like 6 times during the show, and I was like, this is so my jam. I'm like, I love everything about this.
Well, right. I think this idea that, you know, what if everything you've been told your whole life is a lie is really, like you say, it has this universal appeal. And I think it's probably more striking if you were raised in some like really insular religious community or something like that. But I think that all of us, you know, we come into the world knowing absolutely nothing. And we basically just have to kind of trust that the people that who raise us and that we meet and like and love and everything are giving us an accurate picture of reality. And it's actually really hard to know what's true as a human being. And so explicitly one of the characters says, you know, this is the question that matters the most is, quote, what if everything you know to be true, everything you've been told by the people you love was in fact just one big lie? And I think that that's sort of the human condition in a way. I think none of us can really escape, you know, having our picture of reality be formed by the human community that we happen to find ourselves in. Yeah. So I think the show is universal. I mean, I was not raised in an insular religious community, sort of very much the opposite, but like all of this I think this resonates with me too. So.
And, you know, speaking of the lies that are told in the show, I can't help but wonder, and I guess book readers know this, but I don't, is the whole Freedom Day Revolution thing. Did that actually happen, or is it just a lie, like a narrative that they're all told in every silo, you know, because that's just, you know, the story that's laid out to keep people in check.
Yeah. So John, you read, how much of the series have you read?
Oh, I've read all of them.
Okay, so don't tell us anything
I won't.
From future
I don't
books.
remember the answer to his question, so I couldn't have spoiled that one. I read them like 10 years ago, so, you know.
Yeah, I ordered the books after the first episode because I posted about it and people told me about, you know, these books that they all read 10 years ago. So I was like, okay, I'm on board. So I ordered the books and I noticed that they said a John Joseph Adams book. And I was like, all right, I get it.
Did you get the box set that has the short story books in the back?
I did not. They did not come in a box, but I got the 3 soft cover books with the nice illustrations on the front that are very like graphic of the actual spirals.
Nice.
Yeah, those are pretty dope.
I can't wait to actually read them, but I really love this period of not knowing and all the theory videos I watch on YouTube. You know, I really like to do the deep dive.
But yeah, so
I was just thinking of like when Battlestar Galactica was on, and like me and Dave and our friends, we were just like trying to figure out everything that was going on, and we were like having like these really in-depth conversations, and I can only imagine like how that could have been totally ruined if it was based on books, and then we could have just went and looked it up to see what all the mysteries were. So that's going to be a constant struggle for y'all as you go through if you're trying to maintain the show's unspoiledness.
Wait, yeah. So I'll just say, so the series currently consists of 3 books: Wool, Shift, and Dust. Like I said, I only read the first half of Wool. And so, Sarah, have you read any of those books, or you just sort of have them sitting there ready to read later?
I am almost done with the first book. And I love the writing style. So I think that, and I also love the fact that it's so similar to the series. So often we read the book first and then a show comes out 5-10 years later. And I really actually love the experience of watching a show first and then reading it, because it's almost like, usually the book is better. And so it's almost like you get to have more of whatever, story that you fell in love with. And so I love, very deliberately. In fact, I have a friend of mine who I put on the Expanse series, and he was like insistent that he would read the books first. And so he's been talking to me about them before he touches the series. And he's been talking to me about them, and he's like, telling me that he's not really getting into the characters that much, and he finds the writing style very masculine. And it occurred to me like, oh, the reason I like this is because I watched the series first. I would probably have had the same impressions. I love The Expanse and I love the books, but it does have much less of a highly descriptive, poetic, rich way of description, in those books. And there's so much that the characters of the series brings. But anyway, so, it's super fun when you discover it this way, when you watch the series first and then you read the books. And I will probably, just based on how much I'm enjoying the books, I'm sure I'll be done with the third by the time the second season of the show comes out, and I'll know everything.
Sarah, this is by far my most unpopular hot take, because I'm certainly not anti-book. But yeah, when I know I'm going to watch a show or a TV series or a movie, I do like to watch that thing first and then read, because I agree.
Yeah.
Then reading becomes this supplemental deeper dive, and you kind of have the imagery and the voices in your head. For me, I like that. And then you're not, contrasting the negative aspects of the show versus the book. You can enjoy both a little more, I think.
Yeah, I find it's very hard to enjoy a show, if you already read the book and really like it.
Yeah.
So
because they're gonna shorten it no matter what they do. I felt that way about In the Heart of the Sea. I loved the book, and I was so disappointed when the movie came out.
Yeah, and I want to enjoy the movies and the shows. I don't want to sit there thinking, boy, the book was so much better.
Yeah.
But I'll just say again, but it's been like John, it's been 10 years since I read the book. So anything I say comparing the book and the show should just keep in mind, I didn't even remember that I'd asked you Howey's questions. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's funny, because it had been so long since I read Wool, I after we watched the finale, I was like, wait a minute, that is not where Wool ends, right? Like, what the hell else happens in Wool? And so I went and looked back at my copy, and I was like, oh yeah, right, there's all this stuff. I had forgotten all of that was in Wool, not in the other books, So I mean, that's where they stopped it is a really great place to end it for a season. So I applaud their choice there.
That's great. It's always really tricky adapting a book series, because you look at Outlander, and I'm enjoying season 7, by the way, but I think they're going to make less seasons than there are books, so they're kind of rushing now towards the finish.
All right, but let's
10 or 11 books.
Okay, well, let's focus a little more on what happens in this show. So I guess so Rafael, so there's a bit of like a fake out kind of thing in the first couple episodes where you don't know if the world outside is really, beautiful, or is it really toxic, or so I guess, I mean, so basically what happens is that if you say you want to go outside, they put you in a suit, like a biohazard suit, and send you outside, and you're supposed to clean the camera because it accumulates toxic dust or something. And then you're supposed to just go off as far as you can. And at least in the book, this was a little more explicit in the book, but they claim that they're constantly trying to improve the suits. So each person typically gets a little bit farther than the last person. And you always have the hope that they finally cracked the problem and you're not going to die when you go outside. So what did you think of that? Like, did you have theories about what was going on, or did you think what did you think the world outside was like?
The show kept me guessing in that regard, because they kind of tip their, they show you that video pretty early on, when Rashida Jones figures out, when she uncovers the deleted file and she sees that it's nice outside, actually, you are led to think that. So I was kind of waiting for the double twist to happen at some point. But, the thing that threw me the most was simply the fact that Rashida Jones wasn't the lead of the show. because I hadn't really caught any of the marketing. All of a sudden the show was just coming out and I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. So I thought that was really well handled. Just the fact that, she's listed first in the credits in the pilot, and then all of a sudden that's not really the case. So I thought that was pretty well done.
Yeah, that's the other big fake out right in the early episodes. Like, oh wait, protagonist fake out.
Yeah, and that definitely threw some of my friends for a loop, but I loved it. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I watched an interview with Hugh Howey where he said it actually worked out really well because the fact that they kill so many people off right at the beginning because they could get these amazing actors who wouldn't have been available for the entire season but could do 2 or 3 episodes and enabled
and of course on some level you wonder, or at least I did, if they're actually dead or if we're just seeing the image of their death, Yeah. Honestly, I still don't really know because they're I guess by the end, we are talking fully spoilers for season 1, right? Yeah. I guess their bodies were there, but she couldn't see them. I don't know. It was interesting how they kind of handled that.
Well, no, but at least unless like I said, I've only read the first half of the first book, so I have no information beyond what's in the show. But we know that the bodies were. She puts the sheriff's badge thing on the body, so at least unless they're in some sort of like VR thing or I don't know, something like that. It certainly seems that the world outside is a toxic wasteland.
For sure.
So that's my operating assumption at the moment is that the world outside is a toxic wasteland.
And I thought that was the greatest twist of them all.
The third book is called Dust and not Grass and Trees or something like that.
Pretty rainbows.
Yeah.
Honestly, I did not see it coming that there was dozens and dozens of silos, or at least 18 of them. I thought that was really cool. And obviously I want to know more about the door that George Wilkins was talking about, at the very bottom, the tunnels that probably interconnect it all. And Sarah, when you mentioned swimming, that's interesting. That's why these characters are so scared of water. George he didn't want to go into the water, and neither did Rebecca Ferguson's character, really, because they've never been submerged in water like that.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll just explain. So a couple characters die off at the beginning thinking that maybe the world outside is not a toxic wasteland. And then we're introduced to our main character, Juliet Nichols, played by Rebecca Ferguson, who you may recognize from Mission Impossible and Dune, who's just terrific in this, I'll just say, right off the bat. But she's, so the silo is this very stratified society where I think there's like 144 levels, and the people at the bottom are the manual labor people who keep the generators going and stuff like that. And then the people at the top are more like the bureaucrats and the IT professionals and stuff like that. And then, in the middle is sort of merchants and people like that. And so Juliet Nichols is she's like the key person down in mechanical who keeps the silo going. And so Sarah, what was your initial take on the character of Juliet?
I loved it. And I have to say that so many science fiction shows, and to some extent fantasy shows, they have a little more wiggle room with fantasy. But when I see a character who is obviously in every way not supposed to look glamorous, and they make her look glamorous, it takes me entirely out of the story. I cannot forgive them for it in this day and age. I just can't. And the fact that she 100% looks like she's not wearing makeup all the time, the fact that her hair looks greasy and dirty most of the time, the fact that she is 100% believable in her character makes me so happy. It's one of the reasons why I stopped watching the 12 Monkeys series. I could not stand what they did with the female lead there. Like, she just was not, she was like Professor Barbie the whole time. I could not handle it. Her hair was perfect in every scene. No, even if she was running through, and they'd like give her perfect makeup, and then they'd like put a little bit of ash on her chin if she was in a dangerous situation. Like, come on, guys. So I just get so happy when they allow female characters like this to fully embrace who they are 100%. Without a single, I think they probably did her eyebrows, and that was it. And I was so happy about that. But she's great. She's great in the role. I mean, she's a wonderful actress, and she's such a brave character. She's such a She's a wonderful, wonderful, rich character. And all of the characters in this show are great.
Yeah, I mean, I think her perform, like if you've seen her in like Mission Impossible, like she just seems like a completely different, just her whole body language and posture and everything. She just seems very sort of, socially awkward and kind of, not sort of not fitting comfortably in her skin. Sort of, she's always sort of fidgeting and
Yeah.
So I was really impressed by how much she embodied this completely different character in her body language.
Yeah, and it seems like she really got like lost in the role where like she just really became Juliet, and I love how they really brought everything from the book to the show, making her do all of the stuff that she has to do in the book in the show, and it's like and it all works believably. Like it's like it very easily could have come off wrong because it's like, well, when you're trying to do all these things that you're not, it's not like she was a trained law enforcement officer. So like when she has to go do the kinds of things law enforcement has to do, it's like she's not necessarily going to be good at those things, but like they make it all work on the show very believably. Obviously she's very fit, having been the head engineer and all that. But anyway, I thought they did it really well.
Yeah.
Yes. So what happens in the plot, as John was just alluding to, basically, is that Juliet becomes sheriff because is sort of picked to be sheriff in this very unlikely, sequence of events, and she takes the job because she wants to find out what happened to her love interest, George, who was sort of the main person investigating the mysteries of the silo before he died under mysterious circumstances. And so, John, how did you feel sort of as the first, say the first half of the season progressed? How did you feel like it was comparing to the books, or how much did you...
I mean, I love it. I love the show, and I feel like it was very faithful. Like I said, I haven't read the books in a long time, but it all evoked everything in the right way for me, so that I was just like completely immersed in it, and I wasn't like comparing it to the books in my head, So that's always a really great sign. And the thing is, like, so I was watching it with my wife Christy, and she has not read the books, and it was really funny just watching her. I mean, not quite to the extent of like when you were watching Game of Thrones with people who hadn't read the books and like watching them get shocked at all of the big twists and everything in that, but like she was just like hanging on the edge of her seat from like the first from the first episode, and it's like they dropped the first two at the same time, so it was like we don't always like watch two episodes of a show in a row, but then when we watched the first one of that, she was just like, oh yeah, we're watching the next one, right? And it was also like they were dropping it once a week after that, and it's like we were watching that first thing as soon as we had time on Fridays, so it was like, it was a appointment television. And I was right on board with it. So it wasn't just that she was feeling that, but, I really loved it.
Yeah. I mean, I basically thought the first 4 episodes were perfect. I really had no complaints whatsoever about the first 4 episodes. Does everyone agree with me on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I'll admit that the episodes in the middle all kind of blur together for me, because one thing I liked about the show was how they introduced a lot of characters. I mean, we had a lot of recurring characters, but we also lost a lot of characters. It was kind of a revolving door. So I'll admit, I don't mentally differentiate between like episodes 3 and 7 a whole lot, but it was all just very...
Well, basically, so there's this crotchety deputy who dies... Marnes, and I thought basically everything up till that was, I had no problems at all. Like, I thought everything was perfect basically up till there. And then in some of the episodes after that, I started having some mixed feelings about some of the stuff. But
I was sad to lose Marnes and the original mayor. They were great characters.
Yeah,
they were so great. Oh my god, it was so sad.
But yeah, so I don't know. Did everyone else feel like the show was like perfect the whole way, or does anyone agree with me that they liked the first 4 episodes or so more than some of the stuff that happened kind of in the middle?
I'm with Rafael. Like once something gets going like that, I think the first couple episodes, feel almost like short stories because they usually ended with the death of someone. And then the following episode, you'd start out with a completely different character. And it's really a testament to how good the show is that it doesn't feel like, oh, they're starting all over again. Oh, now that everybody we knew is gone, they're starting all over again. It never feels that way. But, I also tend to think of it as one long story, even though, we watch them week to week. And it's hard for me to distinguish between, especially once everything got going with Juliet.
Right.
To me, that at that point, it becomes this much longer, all one big story.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't really differentiate them by 10 episodes. I kind of think of the first season as 3 acts. Act 2 was the longest, and that was once Juliet becomes sheriff and she's doing her investigation. And Act 3 is once they turn against her and she's just on the run.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that the show is like perfect by any means. Like, I don't know that I would say that about any show. I mean, anything that I watch, even when I love it, like I'll find like little things here or there that I'm like, oh well, maybe I could quibble about this or that. But I mean, any complaints I had about this show were like so minor that like, I don't know that I could think of them as we're talking about it. But yeah, I mean, I think the first 4 episodes are super, super strong, so I can see why you would say that. But I'm kind of curious, like what your sort of qualms were about once we got to that point.
Yeah, what specifically bumped you, David? Because I guess at no point did something take me out of my just pure enjoyment of the show. I did really love it, like appointment viewing, as John said, the whole time.
Although, well, it's also interesting because, like, Dave, you binged it, right? Like, you watched it all at once, whereas I think the rest of us all watched it episodically as it was released on Fridays. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I wonder if that might be something that you noticed because you were watching it all at once that we maybe wouldn't have picked up on because it was weekly or something. But
yeah, well, and this is, getting back to what I was saying about comparing the book to the movie. And I loved the book. I mean, for years I've been anytime someone says, you do a science fiction podcast, what's a good science fiction book I should read? I've very often said, whoa, even though I only read the first half of it. But the first half was so good. I was like, I'm sure the rest of it's great, So it's something I really, really liked. And one thing I really liked about it was how like sort of tight and fast paced it was. And with the show, I felt like once we got into the second half, I felt like there were a lot of characters and a lot of plot lines. And I sort of felt like they were maybe in a bit of a tough spot where I think if they had tried to do the entire first book, it would not really have fit into one season. And so they were like, okay, well, we're just going to do half of the first book. But then that wasn't really enough to fill up 10 episodes. And, we know, even I know that in the second season, they go to a completely new silo that has presumably completely new characters. So it doesn't really make for just some of the budget and, practicalities of television. It makes sense to save that for the next season. But I felt like they were clearly faced with the problem of, how do we take this first half of the book that's maybe like 5 episodes worth of material and expand it out to 10 episodes. And I felt like, they were clearly fleshing things out and going into detail about these, minor characters like Billings' wife and, Juliet's dad and stuff like that, that I was not always super invested in.
I could meet you halfway, David, and say like 8 episodes worth of material stretched to 10. But I admit I just loved every second of being in the silo because I'm I don't know, when I'm watching something and I really like the environment, it's why I like Tron Legacy so much. I just like the environment,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that one of the things that you notice, like now that I'm reading the books, is that you really, I have so much respect for these people making this show because the things that they did change were changed for a reason. And, like the gender of Walk, for instance, the relationship between Walk and Jules is beautiful. And she's kind of the surrogate mother figure for her and, is willing to do so much for her. And it's and that was totally different in the books. And then they had one episode. You're talking about the tension of the show, Dave, and they have the one episode where they repair the generator, and that is, the whole episode, you're just like glued to your couch with your fingernails dug into the, it's so good. That one episode is so good. And the books is almost trivial. They just sort of mention it in passing that she repaired this thing and it wasn't this big thing. And so they very much upped the stakes to repair that. But they knew, they had such a good sense of what to change on purpose. And otherwise everything is so similar in the books. But, just that, like, the repairing of the generator was so boring in the books comparatively. And in the series, it was just like, you're just gripping, you're just absolutely, fully enveloped and fully invested in this huge machine, and how dangerous it is in this precarious situation that they're all in. And it's wonderful.
I agree. That's a great example of, that whole episode was riveting, and it could have just been part of an episode. But I appreciated that they, gave us a little more. And of course, we get into perverse incentives of why there's always more episodes than fewer. You're going to make as many as they'll let you make. That's what it comes down to.
Well, the fixing the generator thing, I mean, I was basically in tears at that part. I mean, but that was episode 3, I think. That was part of the stretch where I thought this show's perfect, like,
Yeah.
So it sort of felt like, one of my issues was kind of that it felt like the show was maybe sort of padded out a little bit more than it needed to be. I think, like, John was mentioning Battlestar Galactica, and I feel like, there's people who liked the ending. You had this thing, when Lost and Battlestar Galactica were going on, where they introduced all these mysteries and then basically didn't pay any of them off at all, in my opinion. And then you had people who liked the endings of those shows because they said, well, no, because I really cared about the characters and I felt like the characters all had sort of satisfying emotional journeys. And then you had people like me who were like, I didn't really care that much about the characters. I wanted to know the solutions to the mysteries, and I felt completely cheated. And
look, Lost wasn't satisfying for anybody, okay? Anybody who says it was satisfying is lying.
Okay, well, that's how I see things, but I have talked to people who may be lying, but who claim that it was satisfying because they like.
I think it's like Stockholm syndrome. It's kind of like they feel like they care about the characters so much that they're just willing to accept the fact that they were, just look the other way and pretend that they were not greatly, underserved.
Yeah, we're not lying to you. We're just lying to ourselves.
But my broader point is that I feel like there's just, there's shows that, sort of introduce mysteries. And I think different members of the audience can relate to those shows in different ways. And I'm someone who I really care more about, like, what is the world like outside the silo really like? Like, why was the silo built? Like what happens? What's the truth about, like Rafael was saying, the truth about this story with the revolt and everything. And I feel like we didn't really find out anything about any of those things. In the second half of the season, it was kind of all character development. And at least personally, to my taste, I feel like there needs to be more of a balance between, revealing pieces of the mystery and developing the characters. If the whole sort of fundamental thrust of the show is built around presenting you with this compelling mystery.
I mean, that's fair. And without any spoilers from the books, I'll just say, like, I do feel like the mysteries that the solutions to the truth about these mysteries is satisfying. Assuming I imagine they'll keep the same answers from the books, but so at least we have that security blanket, unlike with some of these others, like with Lost and Battlestar Galactica, where it's like, well, they're clearly writing this and producing it as they go along, and they don't really know where it's going. Where it's like, okay, well, we know Hugh knew where he was going, or at least he figured it out along the way, and it's already been established where he's going. It's already there. There's a roadmap. So I'm confident that at least the show won't fumble that. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that's one of the reasons why the last episode is like so, like I thought was so amazing, is because, like, we do get really back to like one of the essential mysteries, and our main character goes outside, and learns all kinds of new stuff right at the end, like right in the last 5 minutes.
No, the ending
Dave,
I thought was fantastic.
Do you think you would feel differently? Dave, do you think you would feel differently if the mysteries that they did solve at the end of season 1 were done with a little more drama? Because I feel like, the thing with the tape, That was a huge recurring theme. And it ended, you almost blink and you miss it. Like you had to really piece it together after you're done watching. There was no huge reveal where you're like, that is why she's able to walk over the hill. There is, but it's just done so subtly. And I think it's done subtly because they're being poetic about it. And you appreciate the subtlety, but you could also understand why people would want, certain people were asking, explain to me the ending, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely, because I obviously knew all that from the book, but I was like, I don't see how people who hadn't read the book would really put this together, because I felt like, at least in my memory, the tape was a huge deal in the book, and it seems like very, very minimal in the show.
Yeah, no, so like as I mentioned, like Christy hadn't read the books, and so she was very invested in this the stuff with the tape, because she was trying to figure out why they kept talking about it and everything, and she was trying to figure out what was going on with the suits. And in the last episode, she wasn't all the way there in terms of like what happened with the tape and why she was able to get over the hill. And so like we started talking about it. I was like, oh, and of course I remembered from the books, that part at least, that it's like, oh well, no, that's the reason why she's able to get, because like walks up, substitutes the tape or whatever. That's what they meant by like, supply, whatever they said about supply, like supplies on board or whatever they said, like supplies got us covered. They're going to give you the good tape. Cause I guess they like sabotage the tape or something to make sure that people would die when they go out there. That's like the gist of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we find out what happens in the book, as I remember it, is that basically, they're pretending that they're trying to make the suits better all the time, but they're intentionally sabotaging them to fail. And part of this is that they have this tape that's designed to just burn up quickly or to fall apart quickly or something.
And that's why go ahead.
Well, so at some point before the story starts, Juliet had stolen some of their tape because she needed tape. And then it was like shitty tape. And she's like, I can't believe how shitty their tape is over in IT. And then by the end, they've put it together. Oh, it's intentionally shitty for this very specific reason.
And that's why Bernard is so pissed at her when she steals the tape, and they make such a big deal about it. It's like, oh well, what's the big deal? She just took some tape, but it's like, that's why, because it's like there's a lot of secrecy around that tape. It's really important that nobody understands what the truth about that tape is.
Yeah,
I actually thought that was pretty well done, because the first few times they mentioned the tape early on in the show, you think, why is this being mentioned so much? And then you kind of forget about it for a while, and then when it all comes together, you're like, okay, that was pretty clever.
Yeah.
So, and you hadn't read the book, and you thought it was clear to you watching the show, Rafael?
It became clear to me in that moment. One of those things where I thought to myself, "Oh, I should have seen that coming," but for whatever reason, I didn't. I didn't see it coming. So I thought it was well done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, even having read the books and like not remembering them well, so from having read them so long ago, like I had to piece it together as I was going along, and like I said, like Christy hadn't pieced it together entirely, but like I felt like that could have been clearer, like what happens with the tape, but yeah. So I'm definitely sympathetic to people who hadn't read the books and didn't quite figure it out, and I can understand why there's people asking about it online and stuff.
Well, it's funny because Walk, first of all, was such a great character, and it was only in that moment that did it crystallize for me. She goes, well, it doesn't make sense unless it does. And before she even said the words, unless it does, I got there, So I thought that was the intent with that line and that delivery.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then like my other sort of thing that kind of bugged me in the show is that I felt like Juliet was often sort of self-sabotaging or like just not getting along with people around her in a way that just I didn't understand what her motivation was. And I'm totally fine with characters, not being perfect or having, abrasive personalities or whatever, but it felt like a problem to me that I'm like, just what is like in her mind, why is she doing this? I mean, she's in this like life or death situation. And she's just like, she has all these, like sheriff's deputies around her and stuff. And she's just like not making any effort whatsoever, it seems like, to get along with them. And, it just seemed sort of odd to me.
I really liked that about her character though, because, and part of it because, we sort of, it's the antithesis of the gender socialization, right? She is the opposite of how women are trained to be. And for her to be in environments like that, so many times I just turned to Jason, and I was just like, she's got some balls. And I loved the fact that it was just sort of, it fit to me more naturally with her character, especially because she was such a strong person and so brave that I feel like if she hadn't had an abrasive quality, her character wouldn't have made sense. She would be too perfect. She would just have been, if she had also known, oh, now I'm supposed to try to be friends with this woman who works just under me, who doesn't like me for whatever reason. Or if she had, had more of a goal, her whole deal is she cares so much about the truth that she doesn't give a fuck about anything else. And I think that, that especially also because she lost the people in her life that really did matter to her, and the situation with her mom was truly shattering her. Yeah. That you can see why she is the way that she is.
And I think there's also even just one additional aspect. I mean, you're right. I loved how her characterization was consistent with the abrasiveness, and it made sense with her backstory. I also think she didn't realize until the end of episode 8 in just how much danger she really was. She was basically trying to get to the bottom of that mystery, but I don't think it really ever clicked in her mind that she was basically putting herself, in the at high risk to go outside herself because the conspiracy was bigger than she ever imagined.
Yeah, I love her scene her performance when she realizes that Bernard is the bad guy and he's the one who had those people killed. The look of genuine shock on her face that was so like innocence depleting. And I think that of everything that she knew about, she was very ignorant in terms of how political machinations work. And, that she was learning all of that brand new. And she was just sort of, with as much as she knew and as strong as she was, in some ways, she was extremely naive. And that moment that other actors might have even made comical, she handled it so well. It was really beautiful.
I agree completely, because in that moment, are we talking about when she's down in the field and she has that, basically he says, did I just hear you say you want to go outside? And instead of saying something to him like, oh, you son of a bitch, she panics. Right. Like she switches to panic mode. She's like, oh, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
She was naive up until that moment. I think only then did she realize just how deep this went.
Yeah.
I have a hard time with the idea that someone who grew up their whole life in this society where you say, like, I want to go outside and it's an instant death sentence, you're caught with a Pez dispenser, it's like an instant death sentence, that she would not realize the danger she was in while investigating the death of her love interest, who she knows was murdered, or at least believes was murdered. It's just like, how is she, granted that if she sort of, has this, she's not great at reading social cues or has an abrasive personality or whatever, but it's like, how could she not be really conscious of the danger that she's in, given like the 5 people who had this job before her have all died in the last, last week or two?
Well, I think she knew that, she was in a bureaucratic bullshit situation, right? She knew that. But I think that, she did not know that she was in a evil authoritarian bureaucratic bullshit situation where you have, the Bernard's character kills the mayor and Marnes simply for going over him and saying, it's ours to choose who sheriff is ultimately. And for that, he killed them. And I think that she would never have been able to put something like that together herself.
Yeah, I mean, there's a moment in the story where, because I could sort of believe that she cares so much about the truth and she doesn't even care how much danger she's in. Although that was a little weird to me too, because she knows how vital she is to the operations of the silo, where she says, I have the most important job in the silo. She basically seems to be the only person who can keep the generator running. So if something happens to her, that seems really bad, like really bad news for all 10,000 people in the silo, which is sort of a factor that you think maybe they would have taken into account when deciding to send her out of the silo. But there's a part where, she talks so George is her love interest who was murdered and who was investigating the mysteries. And she talks to his ex-girlfriend, and the ex-girlfriend says, oh, he was just using me to help him figure out the mysteries. And he's just using you for the same reason. and Juliet, she calls Walk and says basically like, he isn't who I thought he was. I'm just coming home. And that really seemed discordant to me with this idea that she cares so much about the truth. And like, I don't know, it just seems like a weird moment to me where I wasn't sure, again, like exactly how to triangulate her motivations and her, priorities, I guess. John, what do you think about all this?
Well, I mean, I think you're making some fair points. I mean, I kind of, as you were talking, I was kind of thinking like, oh, well, maybe she just ran out of fucks. It's like, you get to a certain point and you're dealing with all this bullshit, and it's like you just want to get some answers. You want to find, I mean, especially once you lose a love interest, even if as she's investigating, she finds out some things that upset her, and things like where like she says he's not who she thought he was, and all that. But it's like I think it's really complicated. You get pulled. She's like the fish out of water character, where she gets pulled out of the environment that she knows and gets thrust into this other completely alien environment to her. So I mean, yeah, I think it's just I don't know. It's just a choice, a character choice that I think it works for a lot of people. Didn't work for you as well, Dave. But it didn't bother me. Although I get your points.
Yeah, and I think that, she the moment that she decides that she's in over her head is when she decides, fuck it, I'm going back to mechanical. And she realizes, I don't want to be part of this world at all. And this world may in fact not be the way that I find out the truth about what happened. It's funny, like we're rewatching a few episodes, and the moment where Walk kind of says, well, why are you giving up? Why are you giving up so easily, basically? And then my partner sort of joked up, Walk's the one that, sent her to her death sentence. Cause if she had given up at that time, she might be okay. But I do think that, for me, it worked, that, it's all part of kind of who she was, in that she had a good balance of being this very brave character, a little too brave. And the fact that they tied it to her mother being the same way. Once she starts unraveling things, she does get overwhelmed, and she's like, fuck, this is way beyond anything that I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, she does vacillate, after she finds out, when she believes that George was never truly in love with her, she does adopt the fuck it mentality. But then, the episode, I think called Hannah, maybe the Flame Keepers, where she's shown the book. I mean, that brings her back in, like the Georgia travel book.
Yeah.
So I thought that kind of revitalized her motivation to want to get to the bottom of it after all.
It's funny, just in passing, like when you started talking about her being abrasive for no reason and not, sort of getting along with the people in the sheriff's department. I actually had the thought about the person who was like Holston's assistant, or like whatever, like his like whoever was like the admin for the sheriff's office. Cause like when Juliet came in, she was just so hostile. Like, and I was like, why are you like, geez, like meet her or something. Like, I mean, she was just like hated her for replacing Holston. It's like, she didn't make him go out to clean.
Right.
But I just thought that part was kind of funny. Cause like I had that thought about that person.
She was a memorable character too.
Yeah,
I was saying a lot of characters kind of came and went in the first half of the season. That was one of them.
Yeah, and it may be a thing where if I were to watch it again, a lot of times, those sorts of difficulties, if you watch it a second time, you're kind of like, oh, I don't know why this bothered me the first time. Like now it sort of clicks for me. But I do feel like maybe like if there was a little more time spent with the people around her who know what her personality quirks are, just kind of talking about them. And so we sort of know like, okay, this is intentional, that she's like this. This isn't just sort of an odd writing choice or something.
Yeah.
Also to Sarah's point,
go ahead.
Or I can't remember who mentioned it, but it is different when you consume something all at once versus week to week, because even with films, you watch them back to back to back instead of over the course of years when they come out. You notice stuff some things might bother you that they wouldn't otherwise. It's just some things can seem repetitive or less consistent when viewed all at once, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was going to say, like, what you're saying though, Dave, is definitely true. Is like, Juliet doesn't get a lot of, sort of downtime to like let you experience what she's like when she's not like hardcore pursuing the truth. It's like that's almost all of her scenes is her just like hardcore pursuing the truth. So we don't get a lot of that other sort of character, interrogation that we might be able to suss out like these issues you're having.
Yeah, one of the things that I really liked about, I think that George, he's kind of symbolized her willingness to let somebody in. And the instant she lets somebody in and she has what, seems almost like her first relationship, her first romantic relationship, really. She loses him in this way, the same way that she lost her mom. And so I think the obsession comes down to, her being unsatisfied with whatever narrative she's given. And because George would have died she heard that he died the same way that her mom died. She was just like, no, I'm no longer willing to accept this. But I think that one of the things that I was so impressed with this show in general was the attention to detail, because they, if you notice the characters that they had down deep, Shirley and Knox, they showed who Shirley and Knox were as children and that they grew up together that way. And that it pleased me so much that the show bothered to cast people who looked like teenage versions of Shirley and Knox, when they were only going to have 2 minutes of screen time. They could have just been random extras who were randomly down there, kids who randomly worked there at that time. But they very deliberately was like, no, these are going to be Shirley and Knox. And we're going to show that she grew up with these people from teenagers. And I loved that level of detail.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I mean, all the production design stuff was great on this show, like the sets and the costumes and everything.
David, to be honest, if out of the whole season, there was only one moment that kind of jumped out to me as something that, was a little head scratching. When she basically lets herself fall through the trash chute, and it's like she would have been crushed a split second later if not for people pulling her out of the way. I thought that was maybe like not a great choice. I would have just stood my ground. You better chance that it just passes you by.
Yeah, I mean, I had some issues with the trash chute thing. I mean, just like I would just think it would be a constant issue, people using those for smuggling or kids playing in them or stuff like that. Whereas the people seem sort of surprised, like no one's ever done this before. And and also it seems like I was just reading this online. This didn't actually make much of an impression on me watching the show, but it seems like she had to have climbed like down 100 levels on that ladder at one point fairly quickly. So, I don't know. There was some logistic stuff there, but I don't want to be too negative because I think the show is so great overall.
I think Paul Billings was such a great character because he demonstrated what most of the people in the silo were like, where he was very much about the rules and had a really hard time, with operating outside of them. Like one of the most heartbreaking scenes is when he decides he's going to burn that book. He's going to be sort of an anti-oath keepers or whatever they called themselves, where he was going, or flame keepers. Flame keepers, he was going to do the exact opposite thing. Instead of saying people need to see this, he was like, no, this needs to be destroyed. And I think that the question that one of the questions that the show is asking is, how many people would just obey and do as they were told, and how rare what would it have been for characters to behave like Jules? I think at one point it was sort of one of the characters says, I was surprised that they allowed, your mother to have a child, because this idea, I don't think, obviously, literally, I don't think that people that's genetics, right? I don't think that genetics determines whether or not you are a rule breaker, but that most people in the silo are given very good reasons to stay in line and do what they're told.
Yeah, I really liked that Billings, was like the spelling bee champ, basically, when it came to reciting the rules of the pact. That was a nice sort of world building detail. And also when the mayor gives the speech, I forget what the holiday was called, like Freedom Day or something like that.
Yeah.
That seemed like there was I thought good world building stuff with that, where they made the silo feel like a, sort of a functional place with its own rhythms and traditions and
definitely
ways of doing things.
Although funny enough, that's probably one of the only scenes where for a minute I was thinking, wait a minute, there's like 3 levels tops that can hear what she's saying. There's 144 levels. She's not even using a microphone. Come on.
Yeah, well, who cares what those people down in mechanical?
Yeah.
Other strong points about the show? Anyone wants to mention things you really liked?
I loved a moment in the final episode when Juliet's speaking in her cell to Tim Robbins. I forget his character name. And she mentions the tunnel. And you can tell with a quick look on Tim Robbins' face, he didn't know about it. He knows everything, but he didn't know about that. But he recovers very quickly and moves on. And then he goes and he tries to recover what's left of the drive. And we do see that there's one drive of the 2 still intact. He might be able to find out a little more next season. Because I know next season we're going to follow Juliet's character, but I also assume that we're going to stick around in Silo 18 and, with Tim Robbins in common a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, he clearly thinks he's doing the right thing, right? Like, he clearly thinks he has to knock off these people, or else it's going to... I think he says, like everyone in the silo will die if I let you poke into these mysteries. So, I mean, that's kind of interesting that he's not just an evil character who wants to hurt people or get power or something, but he seems to be just mortally afraid, like legitimately terrified that something bad is going to happen if all
I think he's sort of both, right? Like he's whether or not he has a good reason, he clearly has let it get to his head, and he's gotten way too obsessed with the power and way too authoritarian in the way that he unfolds those rules and enforces those rules. And so even in the end, when you see the world is actually as desolate as they say, and you start to think, well, gee, maybe they have good reasons for these things, they clearly have gone way too far and lost the plot and gave way too much power to certain individuals, and are not trusting people with the truth on some level for reasons. And so I think that we're meant to sort of question, even when you have good reasons and even when you're trying to protect people, you can still decide to be an asshole about it or not.
That's sort of the biggest mystery at the moment, isn't it? Why go through the whole song and dance of the simulation and the cleaning, all that? If the world truly is desolate and that's what we believe, I don't really see why they're going through the whole thing. Like, why lie about the lie,
Yeah. Well, it sort of makes... So what they do is they project this beautiful scene on the visor of the people going outside because they want them to clean off the camera, I guess, to emphasize so people can clearly see how bad things are outside. So that kind of makes sense to me.
Well, but is that really the full reason? I mean, couldn't they have just installed a little windshield wiper? I do understand the logic of that, and it is clever. It's like people are constantly trying to show to the people inside that it is nice. But they could also just mouth it, couldn't they? If that was the whole... I don't know. I'm almost surprised at how non-communicative the people on the outside are. They'd be gesturing broadly and wildly. Hey, it's nice out here, guys.
Right, but so I mean, all that kind of makes sense. The thing that's weird, like you're saying, is that there has to be some explanation for why if the world outside really is shitty and nobody could possibly survive, and if we open up the door, we're all going to die. If that's the truth, then why do they have to lie about anything? Why do they have to suppress anything?
Right.
Right. So there must be something about that that's misleading.
Right. And that makes Tim Robbins a more sympathetic figure than, say, his counterpart in City of Ember. Like, Bill Murray knew they could go out, but he still didn't want them to because he wanted to hold on to power. So, this is more interesting because I still don't know really what the hell's going on.
You said, Rafael, that you've seen crazy online speculations, or?
I've watched a few YouTube videos, but mostly, honestly, they were theories kind of, week to week, people were theorizing about what was going on. And actually, by the end, a lot of it was disproven. I mean, most fan theories are wrong anyway.
Can you think of an example of something that was disproven?
Oh, yeah. Because there's been other similar shows like that sci-fi series Ascension. So I think people were thinking, well, maybe they're on a spaceship, or maybe it's all a simulation, or it's aliens, so they had some pretty wild theories. In the end, it's really just that there's a whole bunch of underground bunkers and the Earth is desolate, I'm assuming. I mean, unless it really is something completely outside the box.
Yeah, I don't know. So why... But yeah, it is really like, why did they build 18 or whatever of these things all right next to each other and make people believe that they're the only one? Or like, why can't people know what stars are?
Fun to think about, right? Like, it's fun to think about how if we were going to create that kind of situation, how would we structure the societies? Because we would want people to survive. We would want, and it might be something as simple as, they found earlier silos found that people could not handle reminders of what they had lost, right? People could not handle, having access to videos and photos of oceans and beautiful sky and birds and things like that. They just could not handle it because people would just go crazy. And so it might be something as simple as, we have learned that we have to just sort of raise people in this environment and treat them like there's nothing else. This is the world. This sort of Bauhaus aesthetic, brutalist, environment is the Earth. And they're sort of told mythically there used to be something else, but they don't get to see what it is because, maybe psychologically people just couldn't handle it.
Yeah. There is something almost depressingly realistic about the founder's scheme, because I think, if the Earth is uninhabitable and this plan is to basically make people content with living underground for as long as possible, separating the silos makes sense because it limits the amount of variables that can go wrong. I mean, sure, they expect some silos to fail, but all of a sudden, if they're all interconnected, then you've got wars, more, just people not getting along, disasters, who knows?
Well, it could. I mean, I really like that idea, Sarah. That if people that the only reason that living in a silo is tolerable at all is because you can't really imagine anything better, and if you start imagining a better life, then everything goes to hell. I think that's a really cool idea, and it might even be the case that each silo has a different level of, in some of them they were allowed to know about oceans and stars, and those ones fell into total anarchy and. It's like an experiment with, 18 different, groups, and you can see which, they're trying to engineer a way for people to actually stand living under these conditions and trying different stabs at it.
Am I the only one that wants to live in the silo? Am I just that weird?
There is something really appealing in it. And I think it comes down to that, the production design and everything, because I love the idea that the world that we Gen X grew up in becomes its own permanent little microcosm. And that, the way that technology, a piece of technology, for instance, existed in the 70s or 80s, just would exist in perpetuity and would never get upgraded. And they're not constantly trying to create new technology. They just continue to use these same things over and over again. I think it's really appealing for us because we grew up in sort of the last vestiges of the analog world, where we would have seen things like that and used things like that. And then when the internet arrived, everything changed. And so, I remember my childhood as this very different planet that we all lived on than what we have now. And I often wonder, is that something that just happens every generation or two? Or is there something unique to this pre-internet existence that we were sort of given the last taste of,
Sarah, I love that term that we stumbled upon on Facebook, I believe, cassette futurism, the genre of retro futurism based on the 70s and 80s. Yeah, it's great.
So into it.
I mean, I would not want to live in the silo because I would get so sick of looking at those stairs, like the exact same stairs, like every level after level after level after level. Especially if you have to walk, since you have to walk
But don't you want to find out how long it would take you to walk all 144 levels?
Yeah, something like not being allowed to use lifts. I honestly think that it would make sense that they might do something like that simply because they wanted to make sure that people got some measure of exercise. Like if you're living in this tiny enclosed space, and you're not able to, they probably realized like people are a lot less likely to go stir crazy if they can kind of exercise and move around in their environment.
Also, I think it speaks to the separation of people. Just like you want to keep the silos separated, to some degree, you've forced separation on the levels because who's really going to make that trek all the time?
Yeah, I actually saw an interview with Hugh where he answered that question. So sort of spoiler, but he said it was basically just another means of control, that it's hard to get a riot going that overthrows the government when you have to walk up 140 levels to do it. Whereas if you could take the elevator, it would be a lot more likely for that to happen.
Yeah, it's all a system of control. That's funny, David. Last time I was on your show was for Matrix Resurrections. It's always about a deep underground civilization.
I want to get John back in here. John, any thoughts you've been having during all of this?
Oh, I mean, thoughts that have come and gone and long since forgotten during all the conversation. But yeah.
Anything else you liked about the show you want to mention?
Well, I mean, just getting back to Billings, who I feel like maybe we didn't talk about enough because he's a great character, but I really like the way the relationship between him and Jules develops, like, because, they start off kind of on the wrong foot. I mean, largely because Jules is so prickly, but, I really like the way they sort of work it all out and eventually, like, as Sarah was saying, it's like he eventually makes that difficult choice to burn that book, and it's like, to protect Jules. Like, it can't be found in her apartment, certainly. So it's like, it's just like they go a long way together. And I love that actor. I thought like he brought a lot to the role. So, I just want to shout out Billings.
Mm-hmm. Do people have a sense of how well this show is doing? I mean, it sounds like it's doing really well. I mean, I heard Hugh Howey say this is the #1 drama that Apple has done. He said Stephen King has been tweeting about it a lot.
Yeah, I assume it's been doing fantastically well since it was, like the #1 show on Apple. So, I don't know how it was doing compared to other streaming networks or anything. I don't know if anybody else does, but I know it was already renewed for season 2, and I believe they have a 4-season plan.
Yeah. I feel like it's been taking off slowly. There wasn't a ton of social media chatter about it at first, but it got really good reviews and just word of mouth I was certainly trying to do my part. I think that's why I'm here today. I kept posting about it. This is my new favorite show in a long time.
Yeah. I'll say last time I checked, it was 88% on Rotten Tomatoes, both the critics and the, fans or whatever. So, it seems, the thing is, like, when you say something is the #1 drama on Apple TV, I don't have a good sense of how good that is. Like you're saying overall, like, does that mean there's definitely going to be 4 seasons or not? You know?
Well, there's definitely going to be 2 at least.
Yeah, I think they started relatively early. Like, I think that they, didn't like, based on what I've read from how far they are in development of season 2, it seemed like they greenlit 2 seasons in one go because, and again, this really speaks to why Apple is, make it the only streamer that I'm not pissed at right now. I'm pissed at HBO. I'm pissed as fuck at Netflix, and it's so dumb to put all of this money into making these shows and to not give them a chance, and then to not even allow people to, to view them, to decide that it's worth more to them to not have to pay the writers' residuals or whatever, than to, have them up for people to enjoy them. Because how many shows, I mean, we've had examples of shows and movies that had a very slow build and then became cult classics. And, sometimes it just doesn't happen in the first 2 weeks, damn it. And often the better the show is, the more likely it's going to have that slow burn.
Absolutely. Because, you look at some shows that just ended, like Succession. It was always popular, but it really didn't become a phenomenon, I don't think, till season 3 or 4.
Have you seen, Sarah, a lot of discussion of the show online? Like, how much buzz would you say that it's been getting?
A little bit, but not much at all. Like, I feel much in the same way of the other one that we talked about on Apple TV, the weird workplace drama. Yeah, Severance. I didn't hear anybody talking about Severance, and then all of a sudden everybody was. So it was very much the same thing where by the time the finale had come out, people were really talking about it and excited about it. But when it was first released, I don't even think I heard about it. And yet again, it was already cleared for season 2 and they were working on it. And so it makes you feel good about investing in a show when it's on Apple. And when something's on Netflix, it's like, even if all of your friends are talking about it and it's getting great critical review, they're like, no, we're going to cancel it. It's just like, fuck.
Yeah. Apple seems to have a bit more patience. I mean, C got 3 seasons, and Foundation's coming back, so hopefully it grows an audience, because Silo is really good.
Well, Dave,
and they're making it so esoteric. They're like, especially with a show like Foundation, they're like, fuck it, we're going to make this arty and esoteric, and we do not give a fuck if the normal viewer, the average viewer, doesn't understand it. And that makes me so happy, because otherwise you have this homogenization aspect where every show has to be sort of dumbed down to a level so that enough people will be immediately interested in it. I mean, I loved Wednesday, but even that had a homogenative aspect to it where it felt like it was very mass market.
Yeah. We just have to enjoy it while it lasts, because people do turn on shows too. You never know. Like Witcher season 3, nobody seems to care at all.
Well, it just seems like the streaming wars have made it really hard for anything that's at all niche to survive, because, like such a small percentage of the overall population subscribes to Apple TV Plus in the first place. And then if you have something that appeals to a niche audience within the Apple TV Plus subscriber community, it seems like it can be really hard for that show to get the word of mouth the show needs to.
I think streamers got really greedy. I think that Netflix's model of let's make a ton of shows, way more shows than anybody has time to watch. And then if, tank 99% of them and only keep the ones that do phenomenally well. Like, how is that a good business model? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I was going to say, Dave. So this episode is going to have to be the thing that ignites all of the talk about Silo on the internet. Because if people aren't talking about it already, like we're going to get them talking about it now. There's going to be that article on Wired, and then we're going to have the podcast out there. So maybe this will be it.
Yeah. If there's any executives from streaming networks listening to this who might want to advertise on this podcast.
Yeah,
I just want to emphasize that is totally correct. This show has that power to propel any science fiction show to mass popularity. That is also, not in any way an exaggeration.
Also, I have a project to pitch you. Just if
you're speaking to the executives.
Yeah, to the theoretical executive that's listening to this. Hello again. We love you. Don't listen to what Sarah was just saying. We love all you streaming guys.
Yeah, they're on my shit list.
Sarah, we're trying to sweet talk them. Stop.
Well, Rafael had an exciting announcement, which, do you want to say, like, however much you want to say about it, Rafael?
Sure. Thanks. I was fortunate enough to write a sci-fi horror film for Universal this past spring. It's a spin-off to a film that they had in theaters recently. I can't say too much more than that, but should hopefully come out next year. So that's been very exciting.
Yeah, congratulations. I'm sure all our loyal listeners who've heard you on various episodes will be curious to hear or be excited, on your behalf. I certainly am.
Well, thank you.
Is there any way? I know you said you don't have a big web presence really, but if someone's listening to this in the future and they're like, oh, I wonder what Rafael's movie, I wonder what that turned out to be. Is there any, where should they go to find out more?
Geez, that's a good question, because we're not really using Twitter anymore, are we? I signed up for Threads, the Instagram Twitter clone. Well,
you said like your IMDb page with that. That would
sure. That's the easiest thing. Yeah, just Rafael Jordan on IMDb, and anything that I'm tagged in by Hollywood Reporter, Variety, sure would come across there.
All right, cool. Yeah, no, because Rafael off air told us what it is, and
Yeah.
I think it's really cool. So yeah, I'm definitely congrats, man. I'm really excited for you.
Oh, thanks so much, man. You and I have known each other a long time, so you've seen the whole progression.
I'll also just say that John has an exciting announcement that you guys listening to this will know because it will have been mentioned in his bio, but he can't tell us as we're recording this. So I feel jealous of you future people.
It's more
John's
mystery
exciting
box
news.
stuff.
But yeah, sounds like it's going to be pretty awesome from what I gather.
It's been an agonizing several months of waiting. We thought we were going to announce this thing in like April, and we're only going to be announcing it like, a week or like the week after. Let's see, in about 5 days from the time we're recording this, but it will be already out there by the time you're hearing this. But it is very, very exciting.
Yeah, but big, scary NDAs, right? So you can't can't tell us.
And I want to keep doing work with these people, so, and also not get sued, of course.
All right, well, I understand, even though I don't know what it is, I understand it's very exciting, so congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, cool. So we should start wrapping this up. Sarah, any final thoughts on this whole silo?
It pleased me greatly when Bernard said the needs of the many require the sacrifices of the few. As a Trekkie, that just, I was Leonardo DiCaprio pointing meme when he said that. I was very happy.
Yeah, definite intentional reference there. All right, cool. John, any final thoughts?
I mean, I'm just really excited to see season 2 and hope that it stays as faithful as source material, and all signs point to yes. But I'm also just really curious to see how they're going to tackle books 2 and 3 because, without any spoilers, I mean, there's going to be a lot of challenges for adapting those to television because of like what you were saying earlier about like sort of the realities of television, actors who are signed up for a thing and everything. And then once you start broadening it out to the wider world of what happens in the books, it's like, how are they going to juggle all that? It'll be really curious to see.
And Rafael, final thoughts?
Rebecca Ferguson continues to do no wrong. I'll watch anything she's in. So far, I've loved the whole ride, and I'm on board for as long as it goes.
Cool. Yeah, and I would definitely encourage everyone to watch the first 4 episodes and, make up your mind from there. Like, do not miss the first 4 episodes. They're spectacular. Like I said, there was some things I found exasperating a little bit about some of the other episodes, but I mean, overall, it's a really strong show. And I'm definitely very encouraged by John saying that it has a satisfying ending that's already exists out there, that we're not at risk of having them have no idea how to end this thing, as this happens with other shows that I won't mention.
We mentioned them both already, didn't we?
that I won't mention again.
So, David, I want to go out, but I'm not going to clean.
But yeah. So, but it's always good to have another strong science fiction show on TV, and definitely looking forward to future seasons. And we know that we're going to at least get a season 2. So definitely I will check that out when it comes out. And yeah, Rebecca Ferguson, absolutely fantastic in this show, I thought. But yeah, so let's wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with John Joseph Adams, Sara Lynn Michener, and Rafael Jordan. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to John Joseph Adams, Sara Lynn Michener, and Rafael Jordan for joining us on the show. This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy was made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, Tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.